A vast, ornate structure abandoned high in the Pyrenees Mountains.
It's a surprising building to find in that location.
A wrecked research facility in Russia's Arctic tundra.
Something that looks completely bizarre. We actually have a window into the interior of our planet.
A mysterious military base lost in the American desert.
Looks like it was hit by an atomic bomb.
And a towering maze of concrete beams.
So creating these large, flowing, beautiful shapes is actually quite challenging.
Once they were some of the most advanced structures and facilities on the planet, at the cutting edge of design and construction. Today, they stand abandoned, contaminated, and sometimes deadly. But who built them and how? And why were they abandoned? On the border of France and Spain, a tiny village of just 500 people sits in a steep-sided valley. At this remote location, 4,000 feet up in the Pyrenees Mountains, are the remains of a gigantic, derelict structure.
It's a surprising building to find in that location. It's grand, it's almost palatial. And yet, there it is, plonked down in the middle of the Pyrenees Mountains with not that much a civilization around it.
It's neither a disused factory nor power plant, but rather a glass and marble palace. Its ornate three-story facade has 365 windows and 156 doors. And it stretches 800 feet along the narrow valley floor.
The idea that anybody would build something so grand in a place that is almost impossible to get to, that is astonishing.
Immense effort has gone into creating beautiful buildings with a mix of classicism and Art Nouveau. So why is it here, isolated in the mountains? And why was it abandoned? In the mid-19th century, Spain was still largely cut off from France and Europe by the Pyrenees. This mountain range stretches 260 miles along the border. The lack of trade routes severely restricted the nation's economy. The Spanish government realized that they desperately needed a transport route through the mountains.
The idea of a train line that would cross the Pyrenees was extremely appealing. And when it was undertaken, it was a massive engineering project. It was almost like a Panama Canal type of project with super long tunnels and bridges, years of very, very challenging engineering.
The central connection point was this, the Canfranc International Railway Station. Building was underway in 1923. Its critical importance lay in overcoming a specific engineering miscalculation. When early Spanish railways developed in the late 1800s, engineers decided to employ a broad gauge track of 5 feet 5 inches. Yet France, along with most of Europe, matched the international gauge of 4 feet 8.5 inches. It was a fateful decision. There was no way of physically altering the track width or wheel gauge.
Spanish trains ran on a different width of track than French trains. So they had to find a station big enough to unload the French trains, load everything onto the Spanish trains, or vice versa.
The only solution was to create a transfer point from one track gauge to the other. So Canfranc had to be constructed on a huge scale. Completed in 1928, it was one of the longest and highest altitude rail stations in Europe. It was dubbed the Titanic of the Mountains.
By building this huge, impressive station in the Pyrenees, it would open up new, strong trade routes into France and then into the whole of Europe.
Fernando Sanchez Morales is the current mayor of Canfranc.
Muy moderna y muy espectacular. Es el sentido de toda la gran inversión económica que se hizo en esta gran infraestructura ferroviaria internacional.
On the 18th of July 1928, King Alfonso of Spain formally opened Canfranc Station and declared, "The Pyrenees no longer exist." With border protection, a hotel, restaurants, and 2,000 staff, Canfranc rivaled any of the major stations of Europe.
Spain, they think, has finally arrived and is once again a player in Europe.
But dark clouds loomed large on the horizon. A year later, the Wall Street crash sparked the Great Depression, and by 1936, King Alfonso was in exile, with Spain in the grip of a bloody civil war. Rebel nationalist leader General Franco ordered the vital Somport tunnel be blocked to prevent arms reaching the Republican government. Canfranc becomes the last stop on a railway to nowhere.
The Canfranc station had the misfortune of sitting right on kind of a geopolitical fault line. Tunnels were closed for a time then because the Spanish government was afraid of people smuggling in supplies.
The station was commandeered by Franco's army, as the Spanish general employed the help of Adolf Hitler to quash Republican and communist forces. For Hitler, it provided an arena to test out his latest weapons, armored units, and planes of his newly created Luftwaffe. In 1939, Franco secured victory and established himself as fascist dictator. The station reopened, but its tumultuous existence was set to continue. A flood of Jews and refugees fleeing persecution of Nazi Germany passed south through the station. Ironically, at the same time, Franco sent shipments of supplies through Canfranc to help feed Hitler's war machine. Gold and metals for the production of arms poured through the mountains and across the border.
When the Nazis invaded France in the Second World War, Canfranc Station provided a really important railway link for Jewish refugees escaping France into Spain. But going the other way, it also provided a route for the Germans to export gold ore from Spain into France and effectively into the German Reich.
It was also a through route for agents engaged in acts of espionage.
This train line was a vital link between southern France and essentially the outside world. It allowed supplies and information travel to the French resistance. They were even used for some spy missions where some very brave young women would carry packages of information out to Spain, where they would ultimately be delivered on to the Allies in Britain.
In a final twist of irony, as the war progressed, Canfranc became a key escape route, not for Jews, but Nazis. With defeat appearing ever more inevitable through 1945, Nazi leaders flooded through, carrying tons of looted gold.
Because almost the only way to get from France into Spain and onto a ship to somewhere else in the world, because that requires you to get off the train at Canfranc, to walk through Canfranc Station, that one facility becomes a route for evil people to get away and seek safety in South America.
After the war, with just a trickle of international passengers, the majestic halls of Canfranc grew more and more shabby and neglected. And 42 years after it opened its doors, it was forced to shut down for good.
As vital as it was, the rail line was never profitable. And then in 1970, there was a train accident that destroyed one of the bridges. They never rebuilt it. I think it became kind of an excuse to let the rail line just fall into decay. Because by that time, air travel was becoming more affordable, highways were better, trucks were better. They had more alternatives to this very difficult railroad line.
With the rail line out of action, Canfranc was abandoned in the 1970s and left to rust. Today, the station's opulence and grandeur remain for all to see.
A lot of travelers want to make a pilgrimage to see this magnificent train station. There's something poignant about people working so hard on some ambitious technology and infrastructure that never quite works. And then it has to be abandoned and it just kind of slowly rots away.
Van a recuperar vida. Se ha licitado hace poquito, ayer salió publicado en el boletín 27 millones de euros, que es una cantidad importante para terminar de rehabilitar esta estación, para construir otra nueva estación en el otro lado y para urbanizar y adecentar todo el entorno. Ese es el futuro, ¿no?
We may never truly know which Nazis and what treasures passed through these platforms. Those secrets may forever stay hidden in the shadows of the Pyrenees Mountains. But Canfranc Station may yet live to see another day. Around 2,500 miles northeast on the Kola Peninsula, where Russia meets Norway, is a deserted industrial site. A cluster of dilapidated buildings is surrounded by lakes and forgotten in this barren Arctic tundra. The only living creatures to be seen are Arctic rabbits taking shelter amongst the debris.
Well, the Kola Peninsula is extremely remote. It's very, very far north, almost up to the North Pole.
Ruined concrete buildings are littered with twisted wreckage and smashed equipment. And at the center of all this carnage, one building appears to have been ripped apart.
As all of these buildings, partly derelict, what was going on here? Was it some sort of concentration camp? Was it some sort of military base?
So what took place in this bleak and inhospitable corner of Russia's Arctic north? And why was this site abandoned? In the 1960s, the Soviet Union was embroiled in a military and technological race with its ideological nemesis, the United States. The Cold War was played out in a nuclear arms race and a space race. But they were also engaged in a race to better understand our own planet. A scientific investigation of the geology hidden thousands of feet beneath the Earth's surface.
At the moment, the way that we look inside the Earth is through what we call seismic waves. We make a big explosion on the Earth's surface, and we see the way the shock waves travel into the Earth and back out again. And we come up with structures, we find barriers in there. But what are they?
In the 60s and 70s, there was this huge fascination with the structure of the Earth and trying to figure out if you could drill down through the Earth's crust, the top layer, into the mantle, which is the soft kind of plastic layer that lies under the crust. It was almost like a subterranean space race. Who could get down the deepest first?
This complex is the site of an extraordinary project to uncover the secrets of the Earth's geological structure. This is the Kola Super Deep Borehole. Just 9 inches in diameter, this simple and unremarkable metal lid opened a new scientific frontier. And it was undertaken in direct competition with the USA.
In the 60s, the Americans had started a project called Mohole to try to dig down through the crust. They didn't get very far, but they learned a lot.
On Guadalupe Island, Mexico, American geologists penetrated just 601 feet into the seabed. Though this was 11,600 feet beneath the surface of the water. The Russians, however, were aiming to achieve more than 4 times that depth. Their main target was to hit 15,000 meters, or 49,000 feet.
And then the Russians came back in 1970 with this super deep borehole.
Drilling in this cold location gave them one distinct advantage.
The Kola Peninsula sits in an area of very, very old crust. It's called a shield, really old crust. And what's important there is that the temperature increase as you go with depth is very light. So you have much more chance of getting deeper before it gets too hot.
Could the Soviets dig deeper into the Earth's crust than humans had ever managed before? Construction of this desolate facility began in 1965, and in May 1970, drilling was underway. The prize for Soviet engineers was not just outdoing the USA, it was gaining new geological data and access to the Earth's resources. Despite its extreme and remote location, this base offered them the best chance of success.
This is a very out-of-the-way place. They had to bring in all their materials and expertise. But the Soviet Union did a lot of that. They were good at infrastructure and building big, sophisticated bases in remote locations.
Sergei Nestorenko is a Russian engineer and experienced drilling this challenging borehole.
Ну, вы знаете, само бурение этой скважины – это сама по себе огромная трудность. Никто никогда в жизни не бурил ничего похожего. Никто не мог подсказать, как это делается. И приходилось все.
The first problem they encountered was one of basic physics. The borehole was only 9 inches in diameter. But the immense torque created by having to turn drill tubing that weighed over 1 million pounds made the task impossible. Soviet engineers turned to a radical new solution: an annular-shaped core drill.
The technology with drilling is you actually just have the drill bit at the end and moving. You force mud and other things down to keep this thing moving, and that's where it's grinding away at the rock. And in between, you can take out essentially the shaft of rock, what we call the core, and look at the structure of the Earth.
As they ground deeper and deeper, the drilling process became ever more fraught with difficulty.
The deeper you drill, the harder it is to manage the drilling process. Equipment can get stuck in the hole, the temperatures get really high, the rock doesn't behave properly. So this was a huge technological achievement for its day.
Сложности были колоссальные. Изобретать непосредственно на месте. Ну, а так и к таким, классические трудности Крайнего Севера, конечно. Короткое лето, холод, удаленность.
For over a decade, they drilled into the crust using a 200-ton, 200-foot-high drilling machine, housed in a huge yellow tower in the center of the borehole site. Drilling deep into the Earth's crust at an average of 196 feet a month wore out 25 miles of piping simply from the friction and heat. Despite these difficulties, Kola became the deepest hole in the world, reaching an astonishing 39,000 feet below the surface.
the borehole beat the world record in 1979. It was almost 40,000 feet below the surface, which is an amazingly deep distance when you think about it. The Marianas Trench, which is the deepest place in the ocean, is not even near that deep.
As news of the incredible depths being reached by the Kola site was released, rumors about its discoveries began to spread.
The fact that the borehole had been dug so deeply was used to create a hoax, which is called the Well to Hell. You listened really close and put a microphone underneath, you could actually hear people screaming. This was later debunked as complete hoax, but the fact that the hole goes so deeply ignited people's imagination.
Drilling continued down to more than 39,500 feet. At which point, drilling was suspended for a year. This led to catastrophe. When work resumed, the drill twisted off. 16,000 feet of drill pipe had to be abandoned in its shaft.
When you're drilling so deep into the Earth's crust, you're actually miles away from where you are on the surface, and you're drilling and drilling away. That's one thing. If you then take the drill bit out and then you try and re-enter the hole, that's when it can cause many, many problems. It's like trying to find that needle in a haystack down to where you were drilling before, and the drill bit itself can get stuck, and you can break the drill string. And in this instance, thousands of feet of drill string were broken.
Engineers now had to start a new hole from an offshoot at 23,300 feet. It took another 5 years to bore hole down to the amazing depth of 40,230 feet. But at this incredible depth, drilling became practically impossible.
The Soviets discover that when you get far enough underground, the rocks are no longer rocks.
Because as you go down, it starts getting hotter. And as it gets hotter, it's harder for the equipment, for your drill equipment to hold up. But also, the rock itself begins to get a little bit soft. It begins to flow a little bit like silly putty.
With their equipment failing rapidly as they encountered staggeringly high temperatures, the engineers at Kola had no option but to halt drilling. Though they failed to reach their target depth, they pushed scientific knowledge of the Earth's structure further than ever before and made astonishing discoveries.
One thing that surprised them was they discovered a lot of water deep, deep down in the borehole, way below where you would find groundwater or any effects of ocean water.
Scientists also found there was a tremendous amount of hydrogen trapped in the rocks, which is completely unexpected. They theorized it came from water that had been squeezed so strongly that it actually released hydrogen gas.
They're not the only discoveries they made.
На значительных глубинах до 7-8 тысяч метров была обнаружена жизнь, бактерии.
The microfossils found that deep were actually single-celled organisms that had existed long, long ago, and scientists were very surprised that life could even exist or could be found that deeply.
The Kola borehole managed to penetrate nearly a third of the way through the Baltic continental crust. It is the deepest artificial point on Earth, a record it still holds today. Due to a lack of funding, however, Russia closed the facility in 2005. Today, a simple welded steel plate is the only sign that the world's deepest hole lies directly beneath your feet.
You wouldn't necessarily know, but you could be standing on that little metal plinth that beneath you, there's more than 7 miles of knowledge of what's going on inside the Earth's surface. And that, to me, is really fascinating. From something that looks completely bizarre, we actually have a window into the interior of our planet.
Nearly 5,500 miles to the west in Southern California is the Salton Sea, a shallow, saline body of water that covers 350 square miles of the Colorado Desert and lies directly on the San Andreas Fault.
It's an extraordinary feature of the California desert, a 30-mile-long lake in the middle of the wilderness.
On the northeast corner, sun-bleached timbers reveal the remains of an old dock, half buried in the desert sand. Rotting fish strewn along the beach fill the air with the smell of death.
You have desolation and basically decay. It's like a graveyard.
A solitary building has been blasted by the elements, and its crumbling remains overlook the sandy shore. But occasionally revealed by the morning sands are broken concrete roadways, half-buried bunkers, the foundations of long-vanished buildings, and two 4,000-foot-long runways.
There's dead fish along the shoreline. It's one of the most famous post-apocalyptic landscapes in all of the United States.
Why was this mysterious installation built in such a remote and hostile area of desert? And why was it abandoned? In December 1944, teams of scientists began arriving at an air station just south of Salton City. They were part of a vital mission to beat Nazi Germany in the race to develop the atom bomb. While US forces were embroiled in a bloody Pacific War, the joint Army-Navy Z-46 group started conducting classified tests. Codenamed Project Y, this mission to design and build the first atomic weapons was part of the Manhattan Project. Salton Sea was chosen as a key location.
The Salton Sea was ideal for the Manhattan Project and its aerodynamic testing. It was for two reasons. It was completely isolated, and two, that afforded it secrecy.
In the middle of more than 20,000 acres of barren desert, this site became a top-secret testing range, the results of which remain largely classified to this day. Leon Lessica is a local resident, and his brother worked as a security guard at the testing site.
They did a lot of practice here, which was pretty secretive, in fact, very secretive.
You will not see anything as demanding of coordination, cooperation, and integration across industry, academia, and the military as the Manhattan Project.
The tests undertaken at this location were coordinated from here, the Naval Auxiliary Air Station, Salton Sea. Codenamed Sandy Beach. This was an ideal site for testing the ballistic and aerodynamic behavior of different bomb designs.
If you're going to drop the most powerful bombs ever, you have to be absolutely certain you're dropping them with precision.
America's atomic bombs were designed to be dropped by B-29 superfortresses. From 31,000 feet, they exploded 2,000 feet above ground. Teams of observers had just 43 seconds to assess the performance of each bomb before it crashed into the sea. Telemetry was used to assess data relating to everything, from pressure and temperature to vibration and acceleration.
You have almost no cloud cover in a desert. So if you drop a bomb in daylight, you can see exactly where that thing is.
That's the target out there that they used to try to hit. About 1.5 miles out there.
Although it was 400 feet away from the base, the target was practically invisible to the B-29 bombers above. Pilots had to be able to drop their bombs accurately, otherwise they would not survive a real bomb run. A high-pressure blast wave traveling at 1,100 feet per second would knock them out of the sky.
By 1944-45, they're doing a vast amount of ballistics testing because a very slight modification in the shape or length of a bomb on the tail fins can affect that performance.
Salton Sea Base became ground zero for the dropping of 5-ton concrete bombs. This is where the testing took place, supposedly, for Hiroshima.
By the summer of 1945, still unable to test a live warhead at this site, the trials at Salton Sea were critical to demonstrating that the weapons would hit their targets first time.
You had aircraft that had automatic cameras, and when they're dropping live bombs, you can see where every bomb falls and then survey and mark that spot exactly. And you might even be able to recover the bomb itself.
Scientists and engineers are testing over and over again to make sure that the electronic components that are going to make all of that technology turn into the most powerful blast the world had ever seen and work exactly as advertised and exactly the way the engineers and the scientists want it to go.
More than 120 test bombs were dropped at the Salton Sea base. Some casing designs, however, proved less than accurate, and 4 of the giant missiles still lie out in the desert where they missed their target and burrowed deep into the sand.
They did drop something right in the center of the tennis court, which didn't go over too big. I guess that's how you learn.
During testing, the Fat Man atomic bomb experienced a violent wobble when dropped. Yet at Salton Sea, this problem was resolved. The addition of a distinctive box-like tail containing 8 fins, named a California parachute, suppressed the wobble and improved accuracy. Because of the aerodynamic investigations conducted here and the live atomic bomb tests at the White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico, America was able to deploy both the Fat Man and Little Boy bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August 1945. At once, they caused unparalleled death and destruction and secured Allied victory against the Japanese Empire.
Salton Sea was vitally important to the Manhattan Project. Nobody can afford to have the brain power that's been assembled for the Manhattan Project build a bomb that's not going to hit the target.
For several years after the war, testing for the nuclear program continued at the base. In the 1950s and 60s, the nearby Salton City became a popular recreational resort, and military secrecy was increasingly compromised. In 1971, the base was shut down and abandoned. Today, the area has been reclaimed by the sand, and the salty environment has eaten away at the buildings. There is little left of the Salton Sea base to show how vital its contribution was to Allied victory during World War II.
There's no plaques, there's no statues, nothing to tell you that this is once a very important site.
All that remains is a stark reminder of the perils of nuclear development and the cost of all-out war. Across the Atlantic Ocean in continental Europe, 30 miles south of the Belgian capital, Brussels, a desolate industrial area spreads along the banks of the River Sambre. Looming like a monolith over the wasteland is a squat concrete tower. It is around 200 feet in diameter at its base and rises 354 feet into the air. Its corrugated sides slope upwards to reveal a gaping mouth.
It's certainly impressive. It's amazing to see.
It's quite beautiful. They've got these really flowing shapes.
Mysteriously, the wide base is pierced all around by numerous gaps. The tower's interior looks like an unfinished beehive, covered with rotting wooden slats and weed-clogged channels. What lies behind the bizarre features of this massive tower? And why was it abandoned? In 1921, the city of Charleroi was part of Belgium's industrial heartland. Yet, having suffered 4 long years of German occupation during World War I, its hundreds of factories were struggling for power. Despite Belgian neutrality, Germany's invasion of 1914 was followed by a thorough dismantling of Belgian industry. It was part of what historians sometimes call the rape of Belgium. To help drag the nation's economy back to its feet, a state-of-the-art power station was proposed. The enormous power plant IM.
In the process of generating power, typically steam engines are utilized. To make steam, you need water. And when you make steam, that water gets quite hot. To create new steam, you need to take the hot water, cool it down, and then recreate steam.
The power plant was one of the largest of its kind in Europe. At its heart was a dramatic cooling tower, designed to cool the water back down and produce more steam-based energy by burning coal.
We all recognize a cooling tower when we see one. That's because they've got that characteristic shape. It's called a hyperboloid, this 3D form that's quite wide at the base, and then it kind of funnels in before coming back out again at the top. The reason they have this shape is because as the air, the warm air, is drawn up through that tower, it's accelerated through that funnel where it narrows, and that draws more air in from underneath, cooler air, which does the job of a cooling tower.
To produce steam-based energy, the tower was able to cool an incredible 480,000 gallons of water every minute. But this was only possible because of the unique use of its cone-like hyperboloid shape.
The hyperboloid shape of a cooling tower is extremely effective in terms of heat transfer between the hot water and the rising air. In that way, the design has persisted through time. It's a very classical and effective way to do what you need to do.
For all its simplicity, the tower itself was no easy build. The hyperboloid shape was not simply a matter of styling, but a brilliant solution to creating mass without weight.
So creating these large, flowing, beautiful shapes is actually quite challenging, because if any of you have ever tried creating that shape just on a pottery wheel at that size, it's really hard. You're trying to use formwork and molds to create this. You need to change the way the mold fits the higher you go so that you get your curvy shape. You're at a height as well, and you're trying to pour concrete down here. And then think about doing all of that without computers. So you're basically sitting there with a pencil and a piece of paper, working out what you need to do, and then doing it on this really grand scale.
The plant started operating in 1921. Hot water from the plant's machinery was blasted into the tower through its central vent. It was collected in hundreds of shallow channels, designed to increase its surface area and lower its temperature rapidly, with extreme economy.
We're using this principle that hotter air is less dense and therefore lighter, and cooler air is more dense and therefore heavier. And so what happens in these towers is that the hot air rises up and the cool air stays at the base. And the shape here helps and gives it a bit of an aerodynamic quality to allow this flow to happen very smoothly.
Through the interwar period, the new plant successfully helped power huge industrial expansion in Belgium. From 1940, however, Belgium was again under German occupation, and the plant's output was diverted to serve their Nazi overlords. In the post-war years, it continued to serve Belgians, and by 1977, it was the main source of energy in the Charleroi area. Yet engineers at the time had no idea that hanging over its future were two deadly byproducts. Lurking in the channels of the tower was a killer disease.
Inside a cooling tower, it's warm and it's damp, and at the exact temperature in those conditions, they can become a breeding ground for Legionnaire's disease, which can be fatal.
However, the tower continued to operate effectively for decades without any fatalities. Yet its days were still numbered. The coal-powered plant was also producing alarmingly high levels of carbon dioxide. A report found it responsible for 10% of the total CO2 emissions in Belgium. This was followed by Greenpeace protests in 2006, and a year later, it was forced to close down. Considered too unsafe and contaminated to be repurposed, the site lies abandoned. Today, the futuristic appearance still amazes the few people prepared to penetrate its daunting maze of concrete beams. It is now being preserved as an icon of design for future generations.
After decades of being seen as a piece of industrial engineering, its beauty has actually shone through, and that's the reason they now want to keep it.
Now nearly a century old, Power Plant IM and its iconic cooling tower show that when engineers get a design right, it becomes timeless.
For me, I just love the mathematical and structural perfection that these towers represent.
Now abandoned, they were once on the cutting edge of human engineering. Within these decaying structures are the echoes of history. They speak of war and terror, but also of exploration and human endeavor.